Okay, so as you can see, when we look at our specification for attachment, we've looked at caregiver-infant interactions, so the idea of reciprocity and interactional synchrony. We've looked at stages of attachment by Schaefer, so how we have multiple attachments and the role of the father. We've looked at animal studies, so two of our most famous, Lorenz and Harlow, and now we're looking at learning theory. So explanations of attachment. So looking at Bowlby, we're looking at learning theory, we're looking at monotropic theory. So three that we need to have a look at for this, starting with learning theory. So all the things that we're looking at here are from the behaviourist approach. So do we learn to become attached to caregivers? When we talk about learning, it's the associations that develop. Do we start to associate our parents with food, and is that why we become attached to them? Or is it that primary caregiver because they are the one giving us all of the attention? So we look at the main assumptions, look at the difference between operant and classical, so going back to our approaches, a bit of a recap here, and then apply it to some concepts when we look at the study of attachment in children. So Watson is one of our key behaviourists here, and he said, give me a dozen healthy infants, well-formed and my own specified well to bring them up, and I'll guarantee to take any one at random and train him to become any type of specialist I might select. Doctor, lawyer, merchant chief, and yes, even beggarman and thief, regardless of his talents, penchants, tendencies, abilities, vocations, and race of his ancestors. So what do you think that means? So it's, if you had to describe that, we're saying that Watson thinks he can train anybody to become anything. And quite interestingly, there's a lot of different research into that, the fact that we can train people in schools, at home, to be anything that they want. Okay, so how does that link here? There he is, what a man. There's our Watson, he's one of our predominant researchers. He looked at little Albert, with the baby and the rat. Cruel man. So the main assumptions of behaviourism. One thing I need to point out, behaviourism and the learning approach are the same thing. Social learning theory is a form of behaviourism, but they are separate. So they take elements of behaviourism, but we treat social learning as a separate approach. So if we say learning approach, we say behaviourism, they are the same thing. So all behaviour is learned from the environment that we grow up in. So it's all external, there's nothing internal going on here. We're born as blank slates, tabula rasa is the Latin. So everything that we do day to day imprints on us, embeds, and that's how we learn. Okay, so through interactions. At birth, we all have the capacity to learn, so to take things from our environment, do something with them. And the focus of this approach is observable behaviour. So a lot of the research methods in the behaviourist approach is observational data. So looking at somebody with a behaviour category and looking at it that way. So a task then, some keyword matchup that we need for this section that we know already, but we need to refresh. So I would, again, write these down as we go. Pause me whenever so that you make sure you have all of the notes. Starting with a stimulus then. So a stimulus is anything which has the effect of increasing the likelihood of the behaviour being repeated. So like behaviourist and like cognitive, we have a stimulus response. So the stimulus could be sort of like the baby seeing the bottle, and the response is what happens because of that. They get excited, they show more physical emotion because they're in anticipation of being fed. You know, so if you go to McDonald's, you know, you see McDonald's, you start to salivate, you know, you need to have some food. Be there quick though, because they are closing. The response then is the effect. So anything which has the effect of increasing the likelihood of the behaviour being repeated. So it's usually by consequences, positive or negative. So if the stimulus is the bottle, the response is that positive reinforcement, you're going to keep doing it because you want it to continue. A reflex, so any change in the environment that an organism registers, so we're aware of what's changing around us. Reinforcement is simply decreasing the likelihood of the behaviour being repeated by using consequences that are unpleasant when they happen. Where are we? Positive reinforcement, increasing the likelihood. So, if you do something well, you get a sticker, you're going to want to keep doing it. Whereas negative reinforcement, there's a consequence for that. We want to move away from that. We don't want that to continue. And then punishment is where we have that connection between stimulus and response. It's negative. We don't want it to take place. Operant conditioning then, so you can refresh this by yourself. I do advise you to talk to yourself or talk to people around you. Operant conditioning is that learning by consequence, so rewards and punishment. And there he is, there's Skinner, big old potato head, who came up with this idea using rats, using pigeons, to try and see if they would emit a response. Okay, so by positive or negative reinforcement. An example then. Oh, this is so cringe. So Ratatouille is hungry, performs various exploratory behaviours. Oh, look at him go. Loving life. By chance, he presses a lever. Oh, what's going to happen next? So he presses that lever. And then some food appears. Oh, and he's going to keep doing it. That positive reinforcement, I'll do that again because I want a reward. And in terms of attachment, how can we relate his ideas to attachment? So we've got a child here, Cameron, he's hungry. He's performing a variety of exploratory behaviours. There's Mum, and she's got some food. And he's like, well, if I keep doing that, if I keep crying or, showing some negative emotions or non-verbal response, then Mum's going to come, she's going to give me some food. That's going to ease my stress, and then I'm going to want to keep doing it again. Okay, so that's how operant conditioning is linked to attachment. Classical is learning by association. This is Pavlov with his fantastic beard. How we associate two things together to then perform an attachment type behaviour. So we have the dog with the food as a reflex. It's around that environment. Dog hears the lab technician. He then starts to salivate and he's like, I wonder what's going on here. And we have lots of key words here. If you weren't that sure on this when we looked at behaviourism, go away and look this up, because if you can visualise it, if you can draw a diagram that has different reinforcement, then you can get potentially full marks as long as you explain it. So we've got the bell and we've got the dog. And the bell is a neutral stimulus. It doesn't emit any response. If we then pair the bell with the food, so you ring the bell, you give them the food, the dog starts to salivate. So our food at the minute is this unconditioned stimulus. We need to do something with it to make it conditioned, to make it have a response. The salivation is the unconditioned response at the minute. Over time then, what happens, so during conditioning, you start to pair them together, the bell with the food, the dog then salivates, and the bell becomes, still the neutral stimulus, and the food becomes the unconditioned stimulus. And the salivation is the unconditioned response. After conditioning, after constantly pairing them together, the bell becomes the conditioned stimulus, something that now has a relevance, and the salivation is the conditioned response. So it takes time, it takes a lot of training, but you can see why people use classical conditioning with bringing up a child or bringing up sort of like a puppy. They do something good, they start to pair humans with food. So when they see the human, they start salivating because they know that they're going to get walked or they're going to get fed. Okay, so it has so many real life applications. But what has that got to do with attachment? What has that got to do with children? So we can look at it this way. So before conditioning, Here we are. We've got the mum and the baby and the bottle and the babies. The caregiver is a neutral stimulus, okay? There's nothing really relevant at the minute. The food is an unconditioned response, and the smile is an unconditioned stimulus is the food, and the unconditioned response is the smile. We want to pair them. We want to see what happens during conditioning, during that pairing with the mother in the bottle. What happens to the child's response? So the caregiver is still a neutral stimulus. The food is the unconditioned stimulus. The smile is the unconditioned response, okay? Then over time, we keep pairing them, we keep putting them together. It takes a lot of time. The mum and the child, so the caregiver becomes a conditioned stimulus and the smile becomes the conditioned response. Okay, so it's using those key terminology from behaviorism to apply it to attachment. So baby becomes attached to caregiver by associating with food. Now, that's quite a reductionist way of looking at, a caregiver-infant interaction. So we have quite a lot of faults with it. And is it really just that simple as the mum, they see the food, they see the mum and they start to smile? Don't know, we will see. It's quite an interesting way of looking at it. So what you've got on Show My Homework is a consolidation task that we've looked at so far. Do that, pause this. I do have the answers, but honestly, the best thing you can do right now is test yourself, because you're making so many notes, you're writing so many essays, you've got to be doing a little bit of testing yourself. You could go on to FaceTime with other people in the group and test each other on your knowledge. Why not? You're all friends in there. You could bring up each other, make a massive group chat. You joke, but you are the most important year right now, and we're all panicking about you, and I hope you're panicking too, but also still being quite chill. So please do your best to work as hard as possible. And then these are the answers, okay? So I'm not going to go through these. It's what we've looked at so far. So match up what you've got. If you want to do some purple pen, why not? Pretend you're still at school, still learning, still loving life. You might as well still keep up all those premises that we do in school. And then we'll move on to social learning theory. Okay, so we know I love Bandura, good old Albie. Children who observe their parents' affectionate behaviour imitate this. So modelling now, the premise of everything we know about social learning theory, vicarious reinforcement, modelling, imitation, reflects in attachment behaviour. So parents might instruct children about how to behave in relationships. So, if you see your parents hugging and kissing and holding hands, you then assume that that is what you should be doing. So it's very simplistic, I admit, but it does imitate and does create your attachment type. Parents have such a massive impact on how you develop emotionally, physiologically, psychologically. So of course, they're going to have a massive relevance on your future. Okay, so I've got a really interesting clip there. Go away and have a look at that. It's really interesting as to how it links. Oh, hang on. Then the link to attachment. So talk to yourself or talk to someone at home. Use those key terms, or maybe write a paragraph. That might be really useful. Using all of those key terms, explain how the caregiver becomes associated with feeding. Okay, so how would you go about using all those terms? Maybe draw it out on a bit of A4 or a bit of A3 as a way of visualising it to yourself. 2 questions there, the difference between punishment and negative reinforcement, and the difference between operant and classical. All of these tasks I don't put on there for fun, I put on there for you to do. And like I've said in previous videos, I'm more than happy to mark whatever you write. If you write something extra to the homework, I'm going to mark it. Okay, I'm in school at the minute 3 days a week, and I have 2 days working from home, so I have the time to mark it. So please fill up my time. I would appreciate it a lot. I feel a bit lost at the minute, if I'm honest with you. I'm sat in my classroom now, and it's really eerie. So give me lots of work to do, please. So, what I'm also going to try and do in each of these lessons, because I'm worried about interleaving of content, so we did approaches and research methods months ago, I need to try and make sure that we are still embedding that as we go. So I'm going to try and put a methods question in each of my lessons, and the book is a godsend right now. In every page you have this, so research methods element. You've also got the apply it to practice your AO2. Do all of this. Look at that double page spread, complete all of the tasks, okay? It will honestly severely benefit you. So this, psychologists are concerned with ethical issues. They're interested in which is more important when it comes to forming attachments with adults, feeding or cuddling. The experimental design, they'll put the parent who does the most of feeding to stop cuddling their baby. They'll ask the other parent to do no feeding but provide comfort and cuddles. So sort of a bit of a switch, role reversal. A year later, they'll assess how strongly attached the infant is to each parent. 2 questions, 2 reasons why this is ethically unacceptable, and 1 way in which they could deal with the ethical issues in their research. Okay, so 2 4-mark questions. You're looking at about 10 minutes here. Again, pause this, do it, and then compare, or send me your answers if you want to, or share them with each other. What would you put as a response? Then we'll continue with looking at some evaluation now. So learning theory, like we said, it's based on the premise of forming those attachments by operant and classical conditioning. If you were in school, we would have done a bit of an evaluation carousel, but we're not. So I've briefly got the evaluation points very, very generally on the slides here. They're also in the textbook if you'd rather make notes on them that way. But I will just talk through what we have here already. Oh, I'm going to lose my voice by the end of this. So, Harlow's monkeys then. One of our main key pieces of attachment research into animals. Looking at this idea of cupboard love. So, most famous study, we've got 8 infant monkeys. You know this already, you've already done it. Raised in isolation. Each cage, you've got 2 surrogate mothers, one of a wire mesh on the right here. Oh, that's not what I want. What do I want? There. One wire mother here who's just providing a feeding bottle, and the other made of cloth there to provide comfort. So they're measuring the amount of time that they clung to each mother. They put a noisy toy in the cage to frighten them, to see which mother they went to when they were distressed. And obviously, they've gone to the comfort monkey. They've only gone to the wire monkey when they want to be fed. Oh, that's not what I want. But always going back to that comfort monkey for support. Okay, so there's more than just feeding when it comes to attachment. It's about comfort, it's about stability, it's about a safe base, basically. So our main limitation, you can use Harlow here, because suggesting that food is the only real element in the formation of attachment is clearly really reductionist. You know, there's a lot of evidence that feeding has nothing to do with it, and that actually it's about comfort, it's about stability, it's about a safe base. But your however sentence here is going to be the fact that it's an animal bit of research. Okay, so it's a limitation, it's not the only thing. However, we're looking at animals here. So can we still generalise? Probably not. And then think about what your link sentence could be. So all I would say when you're writing your AO3 is to not just copy it straight from the book, try and construct it as a pure paragraph in your notes. Come back to that point evidence explanation link than just copying from the book, because you're not going to remember it. You need the construction element to really boost those marks. Like we said, because we're looking at classical and operant conditioning, those 2 key researchers, Pavlov and Skinner, are based on animals. So I love that, non-human animals. Oh, of course, they aren't humans. They believe that humans are actually no different from animals, but really, humans are cognitively so much more developed than animals, obviously. We have a lot more factors that animals don't really use. We are social animals, we're social beings, so we make decisions all the time. We are more complex. So we are arguing that animals here relate to humans, and I know that rats have a very close DNA to humans, but they're not humans. So it lacks validity because it's providing a really oversimplified version of human behaviour. It's not really being that specific as it should be. Then we've got learning theory, how it explains they learn through association, reinforcement, and like we said, food isn't the only thing that makes people attach to each other. It's responsiveness. We go back to caregiver-infant interaction, sensitive responsiveness, the attention they give their child, that it assists in the formation. It's a variety of different things. It's making sure that you are there for your child when they need them. So it goes back to Meltzoff and Moore. They learn how to conduct relationships through those non-verbal cues. Okay, so it's not just food here that is the most important factor. Operant conditioning, obviously, is very reductionist. It's looking at how you do this, you get reward. It's very simplistic. A drive is something that motivates behaviour, and we've got two types of reinforcers: primary, the food itself, and secondary, the person that is supplying the food. So yeah, it's very popular in the 1940s, but it's not really accredited that much. Obviously, we see it when we look at in schools, when we're reinforcing positive behaviour. It's used in prisons, like by the use of token economies. But how do we know that it, there are many things that people do that's got nothing to do with reducing discomfort. Things like bungee jumps and skydives. So it can't fully explain why secondary reinforcers work, and they do not directly reduce discomfort. So it's very simplistic in its nature. Bowlby, which we'll look at in a couple of lessons' time, is one of our prominent researchers in attachment. And he's arguing that babies only need food occasionally, but they always need emotional security and closeness. They need to know that they are loved, okay? And this doesn't really explain that at all. So conditioning and reinforcements through feeding play some part, but it isn't the main reason. So in a question like this, one of your final paragraphs needs to be, it's important, but something else is also required. And that's where you'd use Bowlby, which is next lesson. These cupboard love theories, which is what they're called, so Harlow's a cupboard love theory. It plays things the wrong way around. Babies don't live to eat. They eat to love. They actively seek the stimulation of food. They're not passively receiving nutrition. They eat to love because it's a bonding sensation. Breastfeeding, for example, is a way of bonding. So it's important, but it's not the only thing they need. So in general, how can it be criticised? We've got a variety of things on here. Ignores the role of mediational brain processes, biology. There isn't biological processes here. Evolutionary speaking, we form attachments to survive. Okay, so it doesn't really talk about that at all. It's too deterministic, it's reductionist, because it only looks at one theory. It's often based on experiments. They have low ecological validity, mundane realism then. And these humanist theories, if we look back to the humanistic approach, they say you can't compare humans to animals because they're totally different. And all the research is based on animals. That's a problem. Quick 4-mark question then. One criticism of the learning theory explanation of attachment. If you want to do a longer question on this, feel free. The 16-marker, check it questions on that page in the book. Plan it, do it, send it to me if you really want to. These are quite bitty, these sections, but they love them because a lot of people struggle to apply it to attachment. They focus a lot on the behaviourist approach, but don't relate it. Okay, so that is the key here.